Okay, hello everyone. It's Devin with the poll here. I just wanted to make a quick video about the reading, which was assigned for today, on Michel Foucault. His article, actually, I forget what the name of the article is, but it's something about subject and power, right? And it's quite a difficult article to understand and read, but one of my specialties is actually the thought of Michel Foucault. I thought I would just go over this article a bit more in depth so you can really understand it in an easy to understand way. Because if you can understand Foucault well, if someone can teach it to you well, it's not that hard actually. You can really get a sense of what it is. So Michel Foucault in this article is really responding to the question of was ist Aufklärung? And that's a question of what is the Enlightenment, right? Which is a question that Kant asked in like the 18th century, essentially trying to understand what is this new time that we're living in at the time, right? 18th century. What is this new time that we're living in? What are its characteristics? How can we define it? That's the question of what is the Enlightenment. And that's the question that Foucault is responding to as well. So for Kant, the Enlightenment represents a time where the authority from God becomes replaced with the authority from people, right? Because before the Enlightenment, you had what's called the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, which is very a contentious term, but that time was really characterized by the church being the most important institution, right? The state wasn't actually that big of a deal. It was the church that was important, and the church lent, or you could say mediated, its authority to the state. So in France, you had the divine right of kings. Same thing in England, right? All the heads of state were religious authorities. So the Enlightenment is a time where that becomes replaced, right? Where people become the ultimate authority. The human brain becomes more authoritative than God. And this also represents a time where people begin to think for themselves. They don't need, the church to think for them. They don't need God to think for them. People can think for themselves, and they can think rationally as well, right? This is the age of where how can I say, like logic, science, math, these are all things that are becoming more and more important. So less spirituality, more of the products of the human brain, right? So that's kind of how Kant characterized the Enlightenment. So before we get into how Foucault characterized the Enlightenment, we should first look at a few definitions. Well, actually just one definition really, which is how Foucault understands power. Because this is really, one of the most important parts for Foucault is that often he'll use words in a way that's different than how we usually understand them. So first of all, for Foucault, power is an always already relation between two subjects. So, okay, this is a little bit weird, right? But always already means it's pre-existing, right? So we enter into power relationships. And so we can think of this with our newfound understanding of intersectionality, right? If you're born white, cisgendered male, this is a lot of power, right? So, and this is just how you're born into this, right? Or if you're, queer person of color, disabled, non-binary, right? These are relations that exist before we enter into them, right? They exist before us, and they continue as we exist. And it's between two subjects, right? So it's not just by yourself, but there has to be someone else. And he says that there is, not only is it already there, but it's always there. Foucault says that in the text, right? That whenever you have two people, there's going to be a power relation, right? And he lists out different criteria, but it's like there's like socioeconomic status, there's like physical status, there's like socioeconomic, right? All those kinds of things, those points of differentiation become power relationships, right? So in essence, the difference between people, people say, oh, we're all different. That's what makes it great. We're all different. I mean, it does make it great, but that also is what makes it a power relationship, right? That people are different. Power also needs an element of free will, according to Foucault. This is very important. So he says on page 790 that it's not a power relationship if someone is in chains, right? So because when someone's in chains, that's not power. That's something else. And he calls it domination, right? So that's domination. That's when one person is just dominating the other. There's no power. This sounds a little bit weird, but actually, when we think of the definition of power, especially in like political science circles, it's actually often defined as like the ability to get someone to do what you want to do. That's power. And then Joseph Nye says there's soft power, which is when you can use like diplomacy and you can talk your way through it, or there's hard power, where you get someone to do what you want to do through violence, right? Through force. And Foucault isn't talking so much about violence, right? He's talking more about the coercive way. So it needs an element of free will, basically, because someone has to be able to choose whether to follow what you want or follow what they want. And it's power when you get them to do what you want. So it needs an element of free will. If you just again, when it's slavery, it's not power, according to Foucault. Other people can disagree, and some people could say this is one of Foucault's shortcomings, is that his work doesn't address, for example, the Second World War adequately. So there's a critique there, but that's how Foucault understands it. Lastly, for Foucault, power is inextricably tied to knowledge, right? He uses this term power hyphen knowledge. And I really emphasize the hyphen. Sometimes people, they translate Foucault and they put power slash knowledge. Even I had a university professor once who did this, a book he wrote, power slash knowledge. And I told him, I don't think this is correct, because slash, when you say it in English, slash means or, right? If you say, I want an orange juice slash apple juice, it means you want orange or apple juice. It doesn't mean you want both. But for Foucault, it's not power or knowledge, it's power and knowledge. And the hyphen shows that they can't be taken apart, that one goes along with the other. So for Foucault, the people who have the knowledge, the people who can produce knowledge and who can share knowledge, those are the people in power. Those are the people that have the power. Okay. So how does Foucault characterize the Enlightenment? Well, there's a few things he talks about. The first one is the development of what he calls pastoral power. So pastoral power is kind of weird to think about, but it's like the power that comes from the Catholic Church, the Christian Church. It's the idea that the government cares for you, almost like a shepherd cares for his flock. So the government cares not just about whether you live or die, but it cares about your well-being, about your quality of life. That's the pastoral power. And this power is at once totalizing and at once individualizing. Weird to think about, but the best example is the census, right? The census is something that everyone does, and it's an individual thing, right? You say, how many people live here? What's the age? I don't know, what's the sexual orientation, all these things, how much money do you make? So this is very individual, right? It's asking everyone on an individual basis who you are, basically. But then the purpose behind this isn't because the government really wants to know about you, but it's to make generalizations on the whole, right? The total population. What's the total age? What's the total gender and sex division? So that's a good example of that. It works on the whole and also the individual as well. He also talks about numeric supremacy. So this is related to Kant's point about the increase in logic and rationality. So Foucault says the same thing, that this is a time where data becomes very important, measurements. This all becomes very important. You can even think of city designs, right? And this is thinking of the Enlightenment afterwards, city designs become grid-like, right? It becomes almost like a mathematical way of designing a city. And so this is kind of one of the developments of the Enlightenment that Foucault sees, is this supremacy over numbers. Also is the development of the disciplines. So disciplines, it's interesting because I think I'm a very good example of this, myself. So what is a discipline? It's like, you think math, science, English. So Foucault looks at the kind of the origin of the word discipline, which is to really get someone in line, to get someone to conform to a particular kind of structure. He says that's one of the developments of the Enlightenment, is that instead of killing people who deviate. Instead, now the state and institutions, they're producing disciplines. And the effect of these disciplines is to produce docile subjects. So subjects that just not only agree with the power relations, but will reproduce them. I said I was a good example of this, right? So this is the thing. Communication studies as a discipline, right? That's what we're doing in this class, right? Is we're trying to get you disciplined into communication studies. So how to write properly, how to cite properly. See, every time I say properly, that's a normative expectation. And it's a power relationship because me and the instructors in this department, we're trying to get you to follow our way of thinking. That's what makes it a power relationship. And so we get these development of disciplines. And so as a graduate student, I'm exactly this. I'm someone who is very disciplined, right? I really fell in line with this box of what communication studies should be. And I'm also a docile subject, right? Because I am now reproducing that power. Not only was it given on to me, but now I'm reproducing it. And that's the idea of the docile subject. And that's the irony of teaching Foucault in the university, right? Is that we're teaching Foucault in a kind of rigid framework, and his whole idea was that this rigid framework is not really a good thing, and he's really getting us to critique these points and to problematize them. Again, one of the critiques of Foucault is that he doesn't often provide solutions to these problems, he just identifies them. But that is a problem that he identifies, and that's one of the ironies of teaching Foucault in the university. Okay, so in conclusion, what are we to make of this, right? Where do we go from here? Because we've kind of been told that everything is a power relationship. We're always in power. We're being made like docile subjects or disciplines. It can feel kind of nihilistic. Like, what are we supposed to do now? If power is everywhere and it's all the time, what can we do? Well, the first thing is to understand that the expectation and standards that we have now haven't been the case for a long time in human history, that this is actually a new thing. And that just as it was socially constructed, it can also be socially deconstructed, right? And here we have to get a bit more into the future, but we can think that there are people who are questioning our way of university and thinking, is this the right way? Or are there other ways we can do things? You have people like Elon Musk, and different people saying that, university education isn't as important, or, focusing on skills is more important. So, it's that these things that we have now, they're not set in stone, and they haven't been set in stone, right? They're a somewhat recent thing, and they can also be changed over time. The second thing is that as a relation, since power is a relation, it means that we actually have a power to change it, right? And a good example here is Foucault's work of prison reform. Foucault was a philosopher, but he also did do actual work, right? He actually sent letters, he petitioned the government, he tried to make the prison system in France better. And that was it was an important point of his, because for him, change doesn't occur through these massive waves, from communism to capitalism. That's not how change happens. And we see this in Foucault's life, where he went through very different governments. Like there was the Mitterrand government in France, and then there was a different one. I forget the names of all the presidents they had. But they went through these sweeping changes, right, from left wing to right wing to left wing. So there was very dramatic changes. And the point was that these dramatic changes didn't actually help people, right? People were still struggling. The prison system was still bad. So Foucault said that change happens around the periphery. And I'd like to just conclude with an anecdote, which is that, I'm from Mauritius. Mauritius is a small island in Africa off the coast of Madagascar. And as a tropical place close to the equator, Mauritius gets typhoons and, hurricanes. And I think it happened in 2004. There was a big typhoon hitting Mauritius. And so let's say this is the island, okay? And this is the typhoon. So what happened was we got all this warning that there was a typhoon coming, and it basically landed like this, the center, right on the island, right? And so everyone was very shaken up, everyone was go indoors, go indoors, go indoors. Okay. Then the typhoon moved away to the ocean. So everyone there said, okay, hallelujah, hallelujah, we can go outside now. The typhoon is gone. People went outside. What they didn't realize was that the typhoon is most dangerous at its edges. Actually, the safest part of the typhoon is when you're right underneath it. So when it moved away into the ocean, it was the edge that was now hitting Mauritius. And that is when all the destruction happened. So the point is that power can be found in the margins. Power can be found in the periphery. It's not found in the hegemonic idea, but you can find it in the periphery, in your own local changes. That's how change happens, isn't in the center. So don't expect government to make big changes. Instead, you be the change. You go out, work in your local community. That's where the power happens. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this little explanation of Foucault's reading. I really enjoyed doing it. Don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions about Foucault, his other writings or anything. Happy to answer you all. And I hope you all have a blessed Tuesday for me. Thank you.